So let's start with something you see every day. How rigid are the boxes we actually put people in? I mean, we judge gender by hair, clothes, posture, even how someone shakes your hand, right? But what happens when that quick judgment, that box, just completely clashes with who a person knows they are deep down?
Yeah, and that clash, it's everywhere. That's why we're doing this deep dive into the sources today. The data really backs this up. We're talking like 1.6 million people just in the U.S. who
Hmm.
identify with a gender different from the one they were assigned at birth. That figures from Herman's research back in 2022. So our mission, really, is to try and understand that tension. We're using the tools of sociology here, sociological imagination, to explore gender, not as some fixed biological thing, but as this relentless social identity. One that's constantly being constructed, imposed on us, enforced, and importantly, often challenged.
Right. And this gets to the core thesis, I think, from everything we looked at for today. It's this idea that kind of anchors the whole deep dive. We're examining a system that is, quote, real but not true.
Exactly. That's the paradox, isn't it? Social constructions, and gender is a huge one, they aren't these objective universal facts. They change across cultures, across time. But, and this is the crucial part, because society acts like they're real, because we collectively agree they are, they have these intense, tangible, real-life consequences. They affect absolutely everyone.
Okay. Let's unpack that a bit, this idea of a construct.
Yeah.
Before we dive into how gender works specifically, what exactly do we mean by a social construct in this context? Can we define that simply?
Yeah, simply put, it's a shared meaning, something that a society creates, agrees upon, accepts, and then reproduces through interaction. It doesn't have some, inherent definition outside of us. It means what we collectively decide it means. Think about laws or countries, even money.
Right, like a dollar bill, it's just paper and ink.
Precisely. But the idea of its value, that's the construct. It only works because we all buy into it.
So if we all just collectively decided tomorrow that, I don't know, the borders on a map didn't matter anymore, the land would still be there, obviously, but the idea of the country, the border, wouldn't be socially real in the same way.
Exactly right. And because society enforces this agreement about gender so strongly, there's that real but not true paradox. Again, it ends up impacting everything, how you're raised, who gets power, all of it. And to really analyze that impact, a really useful framework comes from Judith Lorber.
Hmm.
She argued that gender functions in like three interconnected ways.
Three ways, okay.
Yeah. As a process, as a system of stratification, and as a social institution.
Okay, process stratification institution. That sounds pretty academic. Which one of those do you think the listener encounters most directly, like in their day-to-day life?
Oh, definitely the first one. Gender as a process. That's basically socialization.
Yeah.
Gender socialization is this lifelong learning process. It's how we internalize all the norms, the roles, the stereotypes linked to gender. And the family is usually the first and arguably the most important place this happens. Primary socialization.
And the sources we looked at had some great examples of how incredibly early this starts. It's not just the obvious stuff, like buying dolls for girls and trucks for boys, is it?
No, it's often much subtler than that. It could be, say, giving boys more freedom, more independence at an earlier age than girls.
Right.
When that happens consistently, kids internalize that expectation. Boys learn they're entitled to independence sooner, perhaps.
And it's starting even earlier now, isn't it? You mentioned gender reveal parties.
Exactly. With ultrasound technology, we often know the presumed sex based on visible genitalia before birth. So these parties, they're literally assigning a gender category based on sex characteristics before the baby even takes its first breath. That kicks off the socialization process incredibly early, setting expectations from the womb almost.
Wow. So that assigned gender isn't just giving you a script for how to act, it's also assigning you a rank in society. That seems to lead straight into the second function you mentioned, gender as a system of stratification.
Precisely. Stratification, in sociology, is how societies sort people into layers, into ranked categories. Think wealth, education, status. It reflects how resources are unevenly distributed. So gender stratification means that gender itself becomes a basis for this hierarchy. Especially in patriarchal societies, this system tends to give advantages to those socialized as masculine, and it systematically limits the possibilities, the opportunities for people socialized as feminine, or for anyone who exists outside that strict male-female binary.
You can see that so clearly in history. Like, women couldn't vote in the U.S. until 1919. That denial of political power wasn't just some historical footnote, right? The effects
Right.
linger.
Absolutely. The unequal representation of women in Congress today is a direct consequence. And the sources point out something important. When women do have greater representation in legislatures, they tend to introduce and pass more laws dealing with issues like childcare, sexual harassment, paid family leave, things often coded as female concerns.
So the stratification, the ranking system, it literally means fewer laws get made that address the specific needs of women, trans people, non-binary people, because they lack that institutional power, that representation.
That's exactly the connection.
Which brings us to the third part. Gender as a social institution. This is where those boxes, those ranks, become the hardened rules that organize basically the whole of society.
Right. Social institution is just a large-scale, stable pattern of social relationships that meets some societal need, like education or the economy. Gender becomes institutionalized because it helps create and maintain social order. It defines roles within the family and places of worship. It determines who's eligible for certain services, how products are marketed.
Even which bathroom you're supposed to use.
Exactly. And think about how often you're asked to check the box, male or female, on forms. Applications, surveys, medical records, it's everywhere. That constant demand to categorize yourself reinforces gender as this fundamental institutional structure of our society. It's like the hidden scaffolding.
That's a really powerful way to think about it.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus from gender being just an individual thing, like a personality trait, to seeing it as this massive principle organizing everything around us. Okay, but for this whole system to work, especially with such rigid categories, it seems to rely heavily on an idea that the underlying biology is also rigid, that it's a clear binary. We've talked about the social world treating gender rigidly, but does the biology, does the body actually support that neat two-box system?
Well, the short answer, no, not really. Society teaches us this very tidy story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Females. XX chromosomes, uterus, ovaries, high estrogen. Males. XY chromosomes, penis, tests, high testosterone. And the narrative is that anyone with variations still somehow has to fit into one of those two boxes. But biological reality is way more complex. Sex is really more of a spectrum. It involves this complex interplay of genetics, hormones, and physical characteristics. There are multiple combinations possible.
We tend to fixate on chromosomes maybe, or genitals, but hormones seem to have this huge cultural weight. They're often talked about as defining someone's essence or destiny almost.
Right. And that's where the myth is maybe strongest. We get told culturally, testosterone is male, estrogen is female. End of story. But biologically, every single human body produces and uses estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Everyone has all three. The typical difference between biological sexes is mainly in the levels of these hormones and how they cycle, not whether they're present or absent.
Just that one fact seems to totally undercut the idea that you're defined by just one hormone.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the physical variations are significant too. So much so that medical science itself had to develop ways to describe bodies that just don't fit neatly.
You mean like intersex variations?
Exactly. You have chromosomal variations like Klinefelter syndrome, which is XXY. And then there's genital variation. There's actually something called the Quigley scale, developed back in '95. It's used to describe the range of genital appearances in infants. It doesn't have two options. It has like 6 or 7 descriptors ranging from what's considered typically female to typically male.
Wow. So if doctors themselves need a scale with that many points.
It tells you something, right? It shows that nature produces this variation, but society tries to force it into just 2 categories.
So we have the medical reality, which is sometimes called DSD, differences in sexual development. And then we have the social label, which is intersex. Is that the distinction?
Yes, essentially. DSD is the umbrella term for the genetic, hormonal, or anatomical variations that result in sex characteristics deemed atypical. Intersex is more the socially constructed category we use when society encounters a body that challenges the binary. And the really tragic consequence of this insistence on the binary is how society has often tried to correct this natural variation.
You're talking about the surgeries, the ones performed on infants with DSD.
Yes, non-consensual surgeries, routinely performed to make an infant's body conform visually to either male or female. Many adults who underwent these procedures as infants report significant trauma, psychological distress, physical disfigurement, loss of sensation, even sterilization, all without their consent.
That's horrifying. Are things changing there?
There's definitely a growing movement pushing back. Major organizations like the World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they're now advocating for delaying these medically unnecessary surgeries until the individual's old enough to understand and give informed consent themselves.
So if we loop this back to that real but not true paradox, these very real medical harms are basically caused by society clinging to these socially constructed myths about biology. Myths treated as undeniable truth.
Yeah, you could summarize them as three core myths. Myth one, sex is determined by just one single trait, like chromosomes or genitals. It's a complex combination. Myth two, sex is strictly binary. Again, biology shows us variation, a spectrum.
And the third myth, this one feels incredibly relevant right now politically. It's the idea that external genitals are a reliable, definitive indicator of someone's gender. Can you give an example of how that specific myth is being enforced, like institutionally?
Yeah, this one has deeply troubling real-world consequences, especially lately. If you look at some of the debates and even laws around who gets to participate in gendered sports, the sources we reviewed noted that laws proposed or actually enacted in places like Ohio and New Jersey have included provisions that could allow school staff to perform genital checks on students to determine their eligibility.
Chucks on students.
Yes. It institutionalizes this false, harmful belief that what someone's genitals look like is the ultimate deciding factor of their internal gender identity. It causes immense harm and reinforces the binary using the force of law and institutional power.
Okay, so the social system is rigid and forces a binary, but the underlying biology is actually varied, a spectrum. How on earth does an individual figure out who they are amidst all this chaos, really? How does identity even form?
Well, identity formation itself is a process, right? It's
Yeah.
about understanding who we are, differentiating ourselves, but always in relation to the social world around us. There's a classic sociological concept here, Charles Cooley's looking glass self. The idea is that our sense of self isn't just internal, it's a reflection of how we imagine others see us.
Like looking in a social mirror.
Kinda, yeah. Cooley broke it down. First, we imagine how we appear to others. Second, we imagine their judgment of that appearance. And third, we have a self-feeling based on that imagined judgment, pride maybe, or shame, or mortification.
So our perception of what society thinks of our gender presentation directly shapes our internal feeling about ourselves.
Absolutely. And George Herbert Mead built on this, describing phases of self-development. We start by imitating others. Then we move to play, taking on specific roles, like mommy or doctor. Then comes the game stage, where we learn complex social rules involving multiple roles. Eventually, we internalize the norms and attitudes of society as a whole, what Mead called the generalized other.
But is identity just social learning? What about innate feelings?
That's a key point. Research suggests it's a mix. While socialization is powerful, studies on gender nonconforming children show that even as young as 3, some kids display strong preferences that go against their assigned gender roles. It suggests that gender identity, that internal sense of being male, female, both, neither is likely a complex blend of socialization, biology, and individual internal feeling or preference.
Okay, we need to be really clear with our terms here because they often get mixed up. Gender identity versus gender expression. Can you define those quickly?
Sure. Gender identity is your internal experience. It's the gender you know yourself to be. This is where terms like transgender come in, when your identity doesn't align with the sex assigned at birth, or cisgender, when it does. Or non-binary, meaning outside the man-woman binary, or genderqueer, often used as an umbrella term for identities beyond the binary.
So identity is internal.
Right. Gender expression is external. It's how you outwardly present your gender, through your grooming, your clothing choices, your posture, gestures, voice, all the signals you send out. And it's this expression that the social system is constantly scrutinizing and often policing.
Okay. So when that outward expression doesn't match up with what society expects based on your presumed sex, that's where you run into gender policing.
Exactly. Gender policing is when people consciously or unconsciously enforce normative gender expressions. They might comment, question, or even punish someone for not doing gender correctly according to their assigned sex category. And this policing is tightly linked to societal ideas about ideal masculinity and femininity.
Like hegemonic masculinity.
Yes, Ray Winconnell's concept. Hegemonic masculinity refers to the dominant idealized form of masculinity in a society, the one seen as superior. It usually emphasizes things like independence, aggression, toughness, emotional suppression. And when taken to extremes, this can manifest as toxic masculinity.
And is there an equivalent on the feminine side?
There is. It's often called emphasized femininity. This refers to the forms of feminine expression, like being nurturing, accommodating, focused on appearance, maybe seeming less competent to get the most cultural support, often because they align with and accommodate men's interests and maintain the existing power structure.
But what about women who are interested in things considered masculine, like careers in STEM or playing aggressive sports? Or, well, the sources mention kink toolkits, this idea of the feminine apologetic. What is that?
The pink toolkit is actually a perfect, if slightly absurd, example. The feminine apologetic is this social strategy where women who engage in masculine-coded activities feel pressured to apologize for it by exaggerating their conventional femininity in other ways. So you can be a CEO, but maybe you still need to be conventionally attractive and nurturing. Or you can use power tools, but hey, they better be pink. It's a way to signal, don't worry, I'm still acceptably feminine, to avoid negative gender policing.
It sounds exhausting. And for trans people, particularly trans women maybe, this pressure must be immense relating to the idea of passing.
Immense, yes. The pressure to pass, to have your gender expression be read by others as flawlessly aligned with binary norms can be incredibly stressful. And ironically, it often forces individuals into reinforcing the very rigid binary standards that their existence fundamentally challenges. It's a tough bind.
And when society consistently fails to recognize or affirm someone's identity when there's that mismatch,
Yeah.
that can lead to serious distress, right? Gender dysphoria.
Yes, gender dysphoria is the clinical term for the significant distress someone might experience due to the incongruence between their experienced or expressed gender and the gender assigned at birth. Transitioning socially, medically, legally, or any combination can be essential for alleviating this dysphoria. This is why practices like misgendering, using the wrong pronouns or gender terms, and dead naming, using someone's former name after they've changed it, are so harmful.
They actively reinforce the source of the distress.
Exactly. They invalidate the person's identity. Using someone's stated name and pronouns isn't just about being polite. It's about recognizing their reality and creating social environments where people can actually exist authentically. It's fundamental to inclusion.
Wow. Okay. This has been, well, quite the deep dive. We've really unpacked this idea of gender as something that's fundamentally real but not true. We've seen it operating as a social process through socialization, as a system of stratification, creating hierarchies, and as a powerful social institution structuring our lives, and all built on a biological foundation that it turns out is naturally varied, not the strict binary we're often told.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway, perhaps the most hopeful one, is remembering the nature of social constructs. They feel fixed, permanent, but they're not. Since these rules, these meanings are created, accepted, and enforced by us, by society, they are inherently flexible. They can and do change across cultures and across time, adapting to the needs and understandings of the people within that society.
So, given everything we've discussed, how much of our social, political, even our economic life is organized around this idea of gender, an idea that is changeable, and recognizing the real anxieties, the real harms caused by its current rigidity?
The question becomes, for you, for all of us, what new possibilities for human experience could we open up? What collective anxieties could we maybe reduce if we truly acknowledged and embraced the fact that gender, as a social construct, is always adaptable, always subject to change to better meet the needs of all people? That, I think, is the work that starts now. It's something to really reflect on.